Right, so welcome back to the 10-6 diaries. This will be episode number 3 and it'll be part 1 of the hamstring rehab. Part 2 will sort of be hamstring rehab slash like reintroduction of sprints, which is still really hamstring rehab as well. But this part I'll sort of just like detail what I did post injury. So Scottish students, I sort of talked about that last time, and yeah, we got injured, pulled my hamstring 15 metres in. I was looking really strong in that race as well. I think I was on track for at least a sub 7. Of course, that's speculation, and I look forward to doing that next indoor season. But unfortunately, injury occurred, and it's, you know, like looking back at it, there's a lot of things that sort of went wrong, and there's a lot of mistakes that I made, so it's now just trying to like learn from those mistakes and hopefully try and make sure that I don't make these mistakes again in the future. But for now, it is just rehab mode. So one day post injury, I was struggling to walk. I had to limp. I had to actually call in sick to my work because I just couldn't walk around. I wasn't able to do that. I did like, I don't even know if I'd class it as walking. I sort of like shuffled 800 meters with my dog at like, I think like 5 p.m, which was like 28 hours post injury. And yeah, I just like really struggled with walking. So that was day 1. Day 2, starting to feel like a little bit better. I was able to walk, but with sort of like an altered gait. And then eventually, I think after 4 days, I was able to walk. Oh no, after 5 days, I was able to walk regularly without having to like alter my walking pattern. But I would struggle to sort of walk up like a really steep hill. It's a bit more hamstring intensive. But that was sort of the first few days. But the big focus from like the minute I got the injury was just like keeping some form of movement. So it wasn't any intense movements the first few days, but I was just sort of like slowly, you know, reintroducing more intense movements as I felt I was sort of ready, as my body was telling me I was ready for them. I just basically used like pain as a way to see if I was ready to do something. So basically I wanted to push to a point where there was, you know, where I was just before where it would feel painful, but I didn't want to actually cause any pain because that would possibly lead to a re-injury. And as well, because it was a grade 2 injury, with a grade 1 injury, I have, you know, managed to come back from that within 2 weeks, compete within 6 weeks. So that's like a grade 1 injury, but a grade 2 injury is a whole different kettle of fish. So I really need to be just very careful with it. I need to really exercise a lot of caution. If I feel I'm not ready for something, then I need to just, you know, pull out of it and not do it, and I need to just focus on my health. And that's like a really big thing, and it is something that's really hard. I do plan to run a 400 meter race as my first race back, just because that's going to be like sub 90% really. You know, I'm not going to be hitting like crazy high velocities. In training, I have hit 9.7, 9.6 meters per second since for a 10 meter split. But what I will say is I don't want to be, you know, throwing myself into a 100 meters straight away, because that's just going to kind of like overclock my system. Because as I was sort of like talking about in the last video, I'm an athlete that really responds well to, you know, like racing against people, to competition. I really kind of like show up to it, and I perform really well under the pressure. It's just sort of the adrenaline that I get from the event. It just overclocks my system. I go as I think I worked it out, and I go in the realm of 104 to 105% faster than what I can do in training. So if I hit 10 meters per second in training, I can hit 10.5 meters per second in a race, so on and so forth. So it's like competing is just something that's very intense, so that should be the very last thing. That's the very last thing in this whole sort of rehab puzzle, is getting your first healthy race over 100 meters. And I think the plan is to run a 400 first, then run 200 with very limited acceleration, then maybe a 200 and a 100, with that being sort of the final phase. So I'd maybe run the 100 and then run a 200 afterwards with like a regular pacing, but I'll sort of see. I need to kind of figure out, but I think the first 200 will be in 2 weeks time. So it will be next Sunday actually, so it's not even really 2 weeks, it's like a week and a few days really. So I'll be running that on Sunday. My plan is, so I've devised a whole plan. So I see a lot of people injure their hamstrings coming off the curve in a 200. So my plan is going to be to sprint 30 meters, because that's the furthest I've sprinted in training so far. We'll sprint hard for 30 meters, accelerate really hard, and then we're just going to float from the 30 until 150 meters, and then we'll kind of go again from there. So the reason I'm doing that is because, as I say, a lot of people pull their hamstring coming off the curve, so that means if I'm kind of, waiting to, re-accelerate later on, technically speaking, I'll be sort of more fatigued and tired from running, that I won't be able to achieve as fast velocities, which will sort of hopefully, prevent me from injuring my hamstring. Just have to see. It will be I think 12 weeks post-injury when I'm running that 200, so it's kind of far enough away from the event that I believe I should be good, but it's just going to be, a case of listening to my body on the day and making sure that I am actually capable of doing that. I feel like I've sort of veered way off topic and the video's a little bit all over the place, but I'll kind of try and talk about some of the rehab that I did early on. So, as I say, a big focus was movement, so there is a research study that does say that there's a much better outcome for athletes that start the rehab process 2 days post-injury compared to athletes that start the rehab process 9 days post-injury. I think it was something like, the athletes that started the process 2 days post-injury recovered in 90 days, and the athletes that started it 9 days recovered in 150 days or longer. So there's better outcomes if you start earlier, so as I say, the idea was just to kind of get movement in any capacity that I could and just sort of build the intensity from there. So from sort of day one, I was not able to obviously do a single leg squat, but then by day 3 or 4 I was able to do that without getting any pain in the hamstring. Then I was able just to progress it up, so managed to get my first lifting workout in 4 days after the injury. Did some snatch grip deadlifts with 80 kilos, but I wasn't moving them fast, I was just keeping it a controlled pace, because if I moved it fast I would definitely have re-injured my hamstring, and it would not be fun having to sort of go through a whole nother rehab process. So I did that and just focused on movement speed on squats. So squats are more they don't really involve the hamstring, so I was able to kind of just move those fast quite quickly. And then 1 week post-injury I worked up to a 10 meter fly with a 20 meter run in of 1.5 seconds, which is 6.67 meters per second. So one thing I'll note about that is, so I have some historical data on when I had a grade 1 hamstring injury last year versus this grade 2 this year. So it took me 7 days to get back to 6.67 meters per second compared to, I think it was 3 days to get back to that speed with the grade 1 injury. So it looks like it's about, we can maybe roughly say it takes 2.5 times as long to recover from a grade 2 compared to a grade 1 injury. So that means that there's a much, a bigger recovery time, so we need to take that into account. But that's just sort of my own data and my own reporting. I was able to get jumps back into training quickly, so that was something that was really helpful. Doing, just some approach jumps. I think 1 week post-injury I was able to do some walking approaches. I got a 9.4 dunk, tried to dunk I think on 9.6. Wasn't a clean dunk, I don't know if I'd even really class it as a dunk, but it was a decent jump, and I was touching about 10.1, so that wasn't too bad as well. It was good to kind of at least get some form of explosive movement in after not really doing that for a week. So as well, I was able to start to reintroduce stuff some pogo jumps, and I was able to measure my RSI, and I was able to just get low ground contact times that would mimic sort of sprinting in a sense. But I think a really big thing that I think has really helped me is just visualization. So from day one I was visualizing before I'd go to bed. I was visualizing when I would go to the sauna after the gym. I was just visualizing max velocity reps, visualizing accelerations, just visualizing even just the sort of approach to the blocks, sort of the gaze that I've got when I'm kind of standing there about to kind of, you know, take my marks. I was just kind of doing all these things, and then 5 weeks post injury I worked up to my first acceleration that you just saw there. So I did all this sort of like lifting, I progressed the velocities with the lifting, I was able to deadlift really fast, I was able to start to do clean pulls, I was able to do all these movements without pain, and we were just kind of like working back up. And I did that first sprint session, and I did 8 reps of 15 meters, and the final one is the one that you saw there. I didn't re-injure my hamstring, but it felt like the only way I could really describe it is it feels like there wasn't like a connection. It's almost like there was like a loose wire or something in my hamstring. That's how I would sort of like describe it almost, but it didn't feel like I'd actually re-injured the hamstring. So I thought it was just best then to like not do any sprints for the next, you know, week or so, just kind of take it very easy, and then we can start to progress back to doing these, you know, accelerations from blocks, which I did end up doing, and I'll show that in part 2 of the rehab process, but this is just part 1. So I think sort of the key things for this rehab was get movement early. Next key was visualization, just keep visualizing reps. There is research that does point towards visualization being a great way to maintain skills when you're not able to actually do them. So that was sort of a big thing. Another big thing was just progress the movement velocities. So it was something that I don't think there's actually research on it, it's quite experimental, but it's basically just like moving a weight with faster velocity and getting back to using max intent as fast as possible in the weight room, then with jumps and with just like other training modalities. So that was sort of like the main things I did for rehab. So this has been part 1, so I hope it kind of shows you the process, but the biggest thing is just like protecting the injury and making sure you're not causing any pain. A lot of people come back too soon from injuries, so it's definitely something to watch out for. As well, a lot of the research does say that people will get re-injured within the first week of return to training, so if you can make it past the gauntlet of the first week of the return to training, then there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be able to, you know, make it back into training without getting a re-injury. But again, it is all about listening to your body and making sure that you're, you know, giving yourself adequate recovery. So that's sort of like the main things in this video. Hopefully it wasn't too all over the place. It did feel quite all over the place, but I will see you in part 2, and I promise part 2 will be a lot more interesting than this video because there was like barely any sprints in this.